Dear distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, members of Hans's family, welcome to Bayes Business School. We are here this evening to celebrate the professorship and academic career and much more of Hans Frankort, who will be delivering his inaugural lecture, Doing Better Towards More Effective and Humane Scholarship. Hans joined the Faculty of Management in 2009, having just obtained an MSc cum laude from Eindhoven University of Technology and a PhD from Maastricht University. I happened to meet Hans before I started in 2011. I was struck by his generosity, his deep commitment to scholarly values, as well as his strong humanity. For many years, I had an office across the corridor from Hans. We'd talk, and each time I would always walk away from those discussions a better person. While preparing this talk tonight, I wondered what exactly about Hans made me feel like that. And I realized Hans is an embodiment of the scholarly and intellectual values which we hold dear. One of these values is generosity. One of the things I first came to understand about Hans is he's willing to give his time to students to talk through their problems, help them understand, and help them to learn. He's always been there for colleagues, and he's always equally generous with us. He's always the first to comment on papers, first to give advice, and the first to help others improve their work. A second value which I think Hans embodies is humanism. Hans is a deeply human person. He cares about the value of other people as people. He's also willing to share his own experience of life, good and bad, with others. I recall sharing both the good and bad times with Hans very openly. He always is a reminder to me that we are more than just professional roles. We're more than just titles. We are people who deserve and have value in and of ourselves. But I think the overriding value I associate with Hans and he embodies is a commitment to truth. I've always been impressed with Hans's deep desire to keep digging for the truth, no matter how hard that is, no matter how inconvenient that is. It usually means that his work takes time, the results are always precise, and they're robust. The thing is, you always take Hans seriously when he tells you something. He never tries to bullshit you. When you speak with Hans, he always tries to best understand you. He's committed to getting to the truth, even if it's painful and takes a long time. Those scholarly values, I think, have helped Hans to build a great career. His research examines interpersonal and interorganizational relations, including how efforts can be incentivized and the effects on workplace intensity. His work's been published in the best journals in our field: Strategic Management Journal, Academy of Management Journal, Journal of Management, and many, many more. He's one of our school's research champions. Hans has been the recipient of many external and internal academic prizes. He's also a member of prestigious Academy of Management and Strategic Management Society, and I think most importantly, he serves on the editorial boards of Academy of Management Journal, Journal of Management Studies, Strategic Management Journal. He's the guy who comments and decides what's true and what's not in the best way possible. Hans's work has had a great impact beyond academia. For instance, his work on work intensity has been reported in media around the world, everything from the Financial Times to the Daily Mail and everything in between. Alongside his cutting-edge research, Hans is a deeply committed educator. His teaching on strategy and business analytics courses on the MSc level, MBA, and executive PhD have seen him receive multiple teaching awards. And I've witnessed the passion which he brings to helping students at all levels to understand and often the challenging subjects which he teaches. Hans is a truly great colleague as well. As I'm sure many of you in the room know and will attest, he's always willing to play an active role in the life of the school, whether that's as an informal commentator on colleagues' work, a committee member, or simply a sympathetic ear. Hans is the go-to guy for so many of us on tricky advice, particularly with statistical issues. And much more besides. One of our colleagues in the finance faculty told me if I absolutely had no choice but to speak to someone in management, I'd probably choose him. For a finance guy, that's like saying, I absolutely love Hans and I want to spend the rest of my life with him. Nearly 1 year ago, Hans was promoted to Professor of Strategy here at Bayes. In this inaugural professorship lecture, he will take us through an eventful academic journey to reveal the lessons he's learned along the way in the areas he wishes to focus on in his professorship in the years to come. We'll hear Hans draw upon 18 years of his research to challenge both himself and us on how we become better scholars and how this scholarship can in turn be used for the betterment of society. Before I leave the floor to Hans, I hope you will join us afterwards for a drink and networking. But first, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Hans Frankort to deliver his inaugural professorship lecture.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear guests, colleagues, students, family and friends, thank you for joining today's event. In celebration of my promotion to Professor of Strategy here at Bayes, it is an honor to be deemed worthy of this mark of professional recognition. For support in the process, I would like to thank the university's president, Professor Sir Anthony Finkelstein, members of the university's senior leadership team, among which our executive dean, Professor Andre Spicer, members of the Bayes leadership team, Dr. Simon Parker, and the many senior letter writers from other institutions who supported my chair appointment. I'm tremendously grateful. I'm especially thankful to Emeritus Professor David Sims for hiring me. David is here with us today. I'm thrilled. And to Professor Charles Baden-Fuller and the other members of the strategy group at the time, Professors Joseph Lampel and Gianvito Lanzola. They must have suggested to David that he should hire me. I often think back to David's kind leadership, which was so important for me as I transitioned to my first faculty position. Those were the days. I wish I knew it at the time. I'm also grateful to many professional and academic members of staff here at Bayes and City, my co-authors, and colleagues in other institutions. To past and current students for keeping me on my toes, and to Aidan Yip and Matt Drew for organizing the logistics for this lecture. In academia, reaching full professor is often seen as an important accomplishment. Purely from a career perspective, this will without a doubt be my most important moment. Purely from a career perspective. And there is generally much to celebrate about the positive change we can and do bring about in this wonderful profession. But a professorship is also a position of great responsibility. And today I will focus more on that responsibility and less on the accomplishment. So this inaugural is going to be a bit unusual. Though those who know me well will not be too surprised. I'm going to do some introspection and put the spotlight on myself and ourselves as academics. And by spotlight, I mean this, and not this. Too much sugar is bad for the brain, so I will leave it to others to give praise if they wish. I myself will take the opportunity to share with you some frank views about my work and our profession. As one of my executive PhD students remarked, so it's going to be a roast. Exactly. It's going to be a celebratory roast. My objective, by the way, is strongly in line with our mission here at Bayes. We champion the courage and independence to do things differently. We strive to ensure that every occasion has the potential to be generative. Every occasion leaves an audience, be it students or you here today, with something to ponder. My talk has two parts. First, I will put myself on the chair. I'm going to wonder, out loud, how I might have done better. I won't have time to be exhaustive. I will also briefly sketch here what might be the focus of my work in the years to come. Second, I'm going to ponder how the scholarly community can do better, out loud. And although my school is part of it, I am explicitly referring to the academic community broadly, as I've come to know it over the years. Today represents an important occasion to me. It might be my only chance to do all this with an audience, yet without interjection. Let's begin with myself. Here I am, on the 18th of June 2010, minutes before I publicly defended my PhD dissertation. I had spent 4 years studying the consequences of research and development alliances, R&D alliances. Alliances between firms focused on research and development related to new products and processes. As one example, you can think of the alliance between Pfizer and BioNTech, which gave us Comirnaty, better known as the Pfizer vaccine. In my dissertation, I asked how R&D alliances were related to the innovation performance of firms. How did such alliances allow firms to learn, create new knowledge, or develop new products? On the morning of Wednesday, the 10th of December 2008, I presented one of the dissertation chapters here at Bayes. It got me a job. The paper was never published. I guess it had served its purpose. My 2 other dissertation chapters were published in some form. And later, I also published another paper using data collected during my PhD. Here they are. The first was a co-production involving these 2 men here. They have been very important to me. This is Professor John Hagedorn, gesturing, and Professor Wilco Lettery, smiling. My PhD advisors. I could not have wished for a better supervisory team. John and Wilco strongly shaped my attitude towards research. And I will say a bit more about that later. I'm forever grateful for their kind, generous, and effective guidance. In the paper, we studied how firms learned from their alliance partners and whether that learning depended on the nature of a firm's portfolio of alliances. The second paper also studied learning in alliances, but it posed a different question by asking, does the optimal organization of an R&D alliance depend on collaborative norms in the industry? Yes, seemed to be the answer. The third paper studied new product development. It asked when knowledge acquired from alliance partners would lead a firm to develop new products. In the very last paragraph of my dissertation, I suggested we needed more studies of the formation of interorganizational relationships, rather than their consequences. So this is where I spend a good amount of time as well, resulting in 3 other papers. Here they are. The first, with John Hagedorn, asked when we might expect firms to change their alliance partners. The second, with Professor Gianvito Lanzola, also of Bayes, in the room today, asked why some sellers in online marketplaces are contacted by buyers while others are not. The third, with Dr. Korjan Kavusan of Rotterdam School of Management, asked when and how firms reconfigure their alliance portfolios in response to performance feedback. In recent years, I also began working on a second stream of research. To understand that extension, I need you to meet Professor Argido Augustaki, another one of my co-authors, who has had a long-standing interest in the effort decisions of employees. We're not just co-authors. We're also husband and wife. Without her, I wouldn't be here today. Argiro is one of the most capable, compassionate, and loving human beings I know. I'm proud to call her my wife and the mother of our wonderful son. And the co-author. I figured if she can stamp me as a husband, a co-authorship should be a walk in the park. And it has been. Together, we published 3 papers on the determinants and consequences of employees' decisions to exert effort, with more in the works. First, the first paper found that the intensity of work might have more severe ramifications than clocking overtime. The second suggested that the intensity of work may have yet worse implications if it is motivated extrinsically, for example, by supervisor demands or career concerns. The third found that employees might exert more effort after receiving a periodic incentive payment, even though they knew that the payment was coming. All these papers have had some role in the scholarly discourse. And by working on them, I learned many things that I can relate to students and that inform my current and future research. However, and here we go, until about 5 years ago, I wasn't particularly tuned to properly translating some of this research for working practice. I am now, but it's slow going, because this translation is not at all trivial. By properly translating, I do not mean using tentative, broad brush statements. Things like, these results may apply in other industries where alliances are important. A statement like this is fairly standard in research articles, but it is extremely low commitment because it places virtually no bounds on generalizing the implications of our study. It is so general as to be almost useless. Rather, by properly translating, I mean spelling out specific implications that would transfer to a specific real-world context other than your own study's context. You see, what my research does is that it typically studies a specific context. For example, it says, let's study R&D alliances and new product development in large firms in the North American IT industry in the 1990s. So the population would then be all large firms active in IT in that geographic area during that time period. I would subsequently analyze a sample of observations, which allows me to then draw inferences about this population. This specific example is exactly what I did in my 2016 paper in research policy. Practice asks different questions. They come in 2 forms. The first asks for generics. For example, how is this relevant today for startups in UK biotechnology? This is what journalists tend to ask on behalf of an audience. The second asks for specifics. For example, how is this relevant today for my startup in UK biotechnology? That is what practitioners ask on behalf of themselves, or what consultants ask on behalf of their clients. These 2 questions are fundamentally different and likely require different answers. But here I would like to focus on the similarities. Both questions force me to confront a range of issues. Will my results from IT apply in biotechnology? Will my results from North America apply in the UK? Will my results from the 1990s apply today? And will my results on large firms apply to startups? It gets yet more complicated because of combinations. Will my North American results from the 1990s apply in the UK today? Will my results from large firms in North American IT in the 1990s apply in UK biotech startups today? In other words, I must deploy some advanced logic to translate my research from my world to a completely different world. Exactly. As I said, this translation is not trivial, but it is necessary. And it's necessary because often the best context in which to study a particular question is not the context in which its value may be the greatest. To do better, these days I find myself asking harder questions. For example, which features of my empirical context can change before my results change? Which features of my empirical context can change before any remaining results consistent with my theory can no longer be explained by that theory? And so ultimately, what are the defining features of those empirical realities that are consistent or inconsistent with my theory? I don't always have good answers, but I believe it's important to improve my ability to generate such answers, to find better ways to interrogate the transferable implications of my work. These days, I rely on two approaches. The first is that I may know more about how a specific study translates to practice because of my other related projects. Indeed, in the earlier example, I may know more from also having worked on formal models of R&D Alliance performance, or from also having systematically reviewed decades of scholarship on research and development alliances, or from also having empirically analyzed the nature of R&D alliances across industries and long time periods. I call this approach to translating specific research to specific other applications the portfolio approach, in which my broader expertise helps me translate specific findings for practice. The second approach is what I might call the immersion approach. Dig deep into one context to understand why a specific result occurs, or why it doesn't. I plan to do more of this. Let me give one example. In a paper published in the Journal of Management in 2022, Arguro and I studied performance responses to periodic incentive payments. Specifically, what happens when you actually get paid? You see, a large literature says that once you promise pay contingent on performance, employees may be more motivated and so perform better. It's the classic agency model. In a nutshell, here is performance on the vertical and time on the horizontal axis. At some point in time, the company adopts an incentive plan. The employee will think, well, from now on, my employer offers incentives. They promise to pay a particular amount per unit of my task performance. And so what I will do is I will proactively recalibrate my effort supply. Next, something happens to performance. It may go up, giving us the performance effect of incentive plan adoption. Here, the causal force is the contractual and so credible promise of future incentive payments. The employee's effort is the immediate consequence only of that promise. The eventual incentive payments simply settle the balance between the employee's effort and the compensation promised in return by the employer. The payments themselves cause nothing. It is the well-known chasing of the carrot. We problematized this assumption by asking, do the periodic incentive payments themselves, happening here, and here, and here, and so on, generate subsequent performance dynamics? To answer this question, we followed the customer service function of one company from day to day for almost 1,200 days, 13 quarters. We know everything about it. We know which music they like and what they eat for breakfast. in that company, performance on contractually incentivized tasks did not change following periodic incentive payments. Here, the gray horizontal axis represents the performance trend if incentive payment had not occurred. So this figure says the payment itself causes no change in subsequent performance. That is as expected. But performance on other tasks outside the contract increased temporarily following incentive payments. Following a periodic incentive payment, sales revenues went up temporarily. Revenues per sale went up temporarily. Average call duration went up temporarily. And temporarily, customer service was more likely to consult tech support to find better customer solutions. They sure liked their carrots. But why in the world would this happen? In plain terms, from our suite of evidence, it seems that the incentive payment periodically reminded the employees just how lucky they were to be working at this company. Its reciprocity, stimulated by a periodic increase in the salience of the incentive plan. In the paper, we deal with a large range of other possible explanations. Feel free to have a look. We think we understand why the effect occurs because we immersed ourselves deeply in this one context. But we also understand under which other conditions this effect may occur, and what should change about our context before the effect might disappear. In this immersion approach, deep contextual knowledge and not broader expertise helps us translate specific findings for practice elsewhere. Like in this recent BBC article. There's never a guarantee that journalism is accurate, but it's our job to be as clear as possible and precise as possible in spelling out the implications of our work. What am I planning in the coming years? In terms of what I plan to study, among some other things, I plan to work more on projects that bridge my two research streams. To understand how a firm's strategic interests and positioning have implications for the effort choices and careers of people associated with that firm. Its employees, perhaps, or its board of directors. Two of these projects are well underway. In one, we ask how status dynamics in a market index influence director appointments. That is joint work with Professor Isabel Fernandez-Mateo, who's here with us today, of London Business School, and Dr. Raina Brands of UCL. In another, we ask how competitive intensity in a market influences employees' decisions to deploy competitive actions. That is joint work with Patrick Halila, my PhD student, now at Imperial College, and Professor Paulo Aversa of King's College, also with us today here. In terms of how I plan to work, I only need to go back to the lessons of my PhD advisors. Do the work. Be able to do all the work and do all the work well. Keep writing. Know the literature. Meticulously look after and analyze the data, and be able to discuss every detail of a project, up until the last footnote. Quality first. No games. Do what is right, not what is easy. And also, be credible, be humble, and have fun. Of course, they cannot take credit for teaching me all of this. Having fun, I knew how to do. Engaging in quality research is a responsibility of all research faculty. Careers are meant to be determined by the quality of one's research, among other things. But evaluating the quality of a scholar's work takes time, and so quality is often established based on others' judgments. Let me call the results of these judgments status indicators. For example, we may ask ourselves, was this person's research published in prestigious journals or in journals with a high impact factor? Did their research win prestigious awards? Or did the research get cited by others? Did it perhaps get cited more than that of others? Now, the meaning of quality research is often debated, but the existence and meaning of such indicators of status seem more widely shared in our profession. So much so that we have a certain obsession with these indicators, for better or for worse. When I had my first single-author paper accepted for publication, I shared my excitement for the research. One scholar's only reaction was to ask me in which journal the paper was published. In particular, was it a 3-star journal or was it a 4-star journal? And for dramatic effect, they didn't speak. They just used their hand with a question mark on their face. It turned my stomach. They never asked about the research itself. Indicators of status seem to make quality judgments straightforward. They help us decide who's in and who is out. We've all been subjected to it. I presume many of us have done it. I know I have. One consequence is that status is often somewhat of an objective of its own, which would be reasonable if quality and status were strongly related. Frequently, it may seem clear that they are. Status may even attract additional resources for more quality research. However, for at least 3 reasons, the relation between quality and status can be fragile. I believe I know this from 18 years of participant observation. But there's also extensive research on these issues. For example, research on status in sociology or career tournaments in economics. First, luck can play a role. For example, a journal editor or an awards committee may have been in a good mood. This is rare, but it happens. It's also not a problem, you might say. You win some, you lose some. Or we simply need to decide that for a scholar to be deemed high quality, they must possess at least a specific number of status indicators, 5, 10, 20, 40. Because how many times will you be just lucky? It's more complicated than that, I'm afraid. Because status can be self-reinforcing. Once you possess status indicators, the marginal costs of obtaining that next indicator may be lower. You may win an award here simply because you've been awarded elsewhere. Or for a given level of quality, a high status scholar might find it just that bit easier to have their papers published or to have an impact, perhaps because their name attracts the attention of a journal's readership. It's yet more complicated because games may be played. For example, we may claim co-authorship without subsequently pulling our weight. We may hold on for dear life to a first authorships, even though someone else demonstrably did the lion's share of the work. Or we might use others' ideas, or even others' work, but present them entirely as our own. These kinds of gaming behaviors may seem quite unreal, and they should be. But I have come to believe that they are common. They constitute some portion of the scholarly experience for many of us. And they often seem to involve someone more senior, more powerful, some gatekeeper, a PhD advisor perhaps, not mine, I should add. I have also myself experienced these gaming behaviors firsthand and on too many occasions. For example, not long ago, I saw my work appear in print as part of a publication under other scholars' names. And by my work, I mean pages of work. Gone. The credit taken by others. Others who are themselves professor or looking to become professor. That position of great responsibility. I have no problem with luck. In the Netherlands, we say, without luck, nobody fares well. But gaming has no place in a profession in which the overriding objective is to help towards, contribute towards understanding how some part of the social world actually works or should work. And so where we all must be evaluated for our contribution to that objective. We as scholars all have a fundamental question to answer. On which side am I? Am I on the left? Or am I on the right? The answer matters because the two sides are connected through status, but also directly. And this brings me to one more important relation, that between quality and what I labeled gaming. I believe that this relation is negative. And not because the gamers harm their own reputation, which inevitably they will do. People talk. But because choosing quality, by definition, means not choosing gaming. And because games can cause others serious distress. It can derail the careers and even lives of good colleagues. Good colleagues may consider leaving. They may consider leaving academia. And it may discourage others from even joining the profession. Some have argued that our profession's incentive structure, which ultimately revolves around status, may need to change. I don't disagree, but I do not see this happen anytime soon or at sufficient scale. Also, pointing only to institutional factors ignores that even without such incentives, status is often still a goal of its own. So we each also have an individual responsibility here. We each individually face an important choice. Let's choose not to make status too much our master. Let's choose not to make games our vehicle. Let's choose to do the best work we can, even if it's not always good enough. Let's earn status, but only as a byproduct of the quality of our work. Credit where credit is actually due. I almost feel as if my brief analysis here may apply outside academia as well. Now let me edit this picture a little bit to crystallize the priorities as I see them. First, we must focus on quality first. This is hard because quality requires skills, and skills take time to develop, a lot of time. They take a lot of time also to maintain. We must study questions that are important. We should stop treating counterintuitive findings as the ultimate goals worth pursuing. We must know the research to which our name is attached inside out. We should update our beliefs in light of new evidence. We should be Bayesians, in other words. We should develop consistent theory, implement appropriate methodologies, and spend as much time with our data as necessary. Live with our data, know our data, full professor or not. We must always be ready to ask that extra question for the next level of insight. Ready to go back to first principles and think again through our logic. Again and again. I could go on, but I won't. Next, we must treat status as secondary. You see, status is by definition zero-sum. If everyone is high status, then no one is. Status can also be discontinuous. If one person wins an award, then they stand out. Even if their quality difference from some others who didn't win might have been marginal or non-existent. Quality does not suffer from these problems. If everyone is high quality, everyone is high quality. I'm not saying this is likely or even possible in practice, but in theory it is. So as long as status is our master, we find ourselves trapped in an exclusionary contest. Exclusionary as in, I didn't win the award because you did. And contest as in, I need to play the game to win at your expense. In my view, this tournament imagery of exclusion and playing the game is entirely at odds with the core objectives of our profession. So let's treat status as a matter of secondary concern. It also helps if we stop unnecessarily rewarding status with more status. Perhaps unless that more status is for the continued quality of one's work. As much as possible, let status just be the byproduct of quality scholarship. Finally, let's hope for good luck always. And let's drive out gaming as much as possible. The upshot will be more effective scholarship, because a larger amount of time will be dedicated to quality, first and foremost. Also, the scholarly process will become more humane. First, because we're no longer too occupied with the gamers, those folks too occupied with their own careers, rather than their professional responsibilities. Second, because the primary focus will simply be on quality, and not on status. Let's all do the best we can, and hope for a bit of good luck in the process. I'll conclude by sharing with you part of the brief I was given for this lecture. It asked to reflect on your body of work. But what exactly did that mean? Well, let's look in the dictionary. You see, it turns out that the brief I was given contained the seeds for both parts of today's lecture, because a brief seems to have been both a question and prophetically an important statement of fact. What was the question? I was asked to consider or think back on my body of work. I've tried to do that. And what was the important statement of fact? Well, that we all produce particular opinion of our work. We all reflect on our work through the ways in which we behave and are seen to behave. So, let us do better. Thank you. Now, Professor Santi Fornery has agreed to provide a few personal closing words. Unfortunately, he cannot be here in person because he's at Stanford University for his sabbatical. So he will deliver his remarks remotely. Now, to make sure that he hits the right tone, I will take this opportunity to remind him that we're friends. We are best friends, in fact. He tied my wedding tie. We are such good friends that I almost consider him a brother. It is hard to put into words just how important Santi has been to me. We both joined the school in 2009, when our interests aligned around social networks. Today, our lines of research differ quite a bit, but we remain intellectual twins. When Santi gifted me a book in 2017, he put it as follows: to my friend Hans, who enjoys, like me, the pleasure of reading broadly and experimenting with new ideas outside our usual literature. I could not have said it more accurately. We haven't seen much of each other lately, but he still managed to ask me the question that helped frame parts of this lecture. Thank you, Santi.
Good evening, everyone. And it's a great honor for me to be able to celebrate with you all Professor Hans Frankort, who already managed to make me a bit emotional with all these pictures. And I have to say, as Hans said, we go a long way back. We started our first academic job together back then as young lecturers in 2009 at BASE. And we immediately clicked. We became great friends immediately from the start. In fact, I remember that back then, some people, some colleagues even referred to us as the Laurel and Hardy of the strategy group. And, you know, the tallest member of the strategy group, Hans, and the shortest member of the strategy group, me, always walking around in the corridor and chit-chatting. In fact, although I'm very sad that I cannot be there in person tonight, at least I'm happy that finally no one can spot the high difference between the two of us. At least for tonight, while I'm sitting here. Well, I must say though that our friendship wasn't always the easiest to be to understand in the eyes of other academic colleagues. For example, I remember when once a star academic from US that we invited to BASE, it couldn't quite make sense of how two peers who were hired at the same time were actually close friends rather than competitors. In fact, that star academic even whispered to my ear while we were in the elevator, wow, Santi, you make it look like real and authentic that you are a good friend of Hans. But surely you two must compete all the time, no? And I remember laughing at the time and even shared that with Hans right after, because it never occurred to me that actually our friendship could be quite strange indeed, at least sociologically. So you have two peers that were hired to the same position in the same department at the same time. So that is the perfect sociological recipe for things like, you know, competition, envy, jealousy, all those things for which academia is well known for. And yet Hans and I actually became friends immediately. And so I'm going to spend tonight just a few minutes with you all to explain this puzzle. How is it possible that two potential competitors actually became such good friends? And I think the answer really lies in three characteristics of Professor Hans Frankort, which says a lot about him as the great scholar he is and wonderful human being he is. And I want to unpack these three things really quickly with you. So the first is that Hans listens and engages with other people's ideas. And he does that with care. He does that carefully. And so I cannot even count the number of times we just had a casual chat in the corridor that actually became a 1 hour long conversation where, you know, we were talking about ideas, and Hans has always something meaningful to say. And it wasn't about him, it wasn't about me, it was about the ideas and how to get good ideas, strong ideas, valid ideas. And Hans' joy for playing with ideas was really contagious and really has always drawn me out and invited more questions, more reactions, which were eventually stopped typically by a loud laugh and a joke. And I think people who know Hans know he has a very loud laugh that can echo through the corridors of the entire business school, and you will hear it across the floors. And in fact, I believe in the room there may be some impersonators of Hans' laugh who can do better than I can do. And how do I know that actually Hans was actually listening to whatever I was saying? Well, one of the reasons is that he was always damn sharp and on point on what I was saying. To give you an example, even when I pitched to him, hey man, let's go to this cocktail bar tonight after work. There is a free food with the price of a cocktail. Well, Hans would say, what do you mean free food? surely the price of the cocktail would be higher to subsidize for the food. And I said, wow, he really is listening to me, right? And in fact, he was right. Not surprisingly, the price of the cocktail was higher, but we went there anyway, had fun, no matter what the price of the cocktail was. The second thing that I really want to remark tonight is that Hans is a curious mind. He reads broadly, is an intellectually omnivorous, I would say, scholar. You know, I cannot count the number of times I would pop up in his office unannounced and say, have you ever thought about any examples about this obscure phenomenon I'm studying? I would say, oh yeah, I have a book here, or I have a paper here that could be a good fit. And it didn't immediately resonate or speak to me perhaps at times, but then it always changed the way I was thinking about the phenomenon I was studying. And again, it's that idea of listening and connecting, but it's also in many ways what Andre mentioned initially, that Hans embodies true scholarship, in that he is able to speak about virtually any topic with curiosity, with interest, and with knowledge. It's not about being right, but it's about really being curious and being interested in a topic, and really that thirst of knowledge in terms of wanting to understand what's going on, that I think sets him apart. And just in closing, I think the third and perhaps most important characteristic of Hans, and Andre spoiled it for me for good reasons, because I think everyone that knows Hans knows as much, is a very generous person. He's genuinely generous with colleagues, but with students as well. I mean, as an example, and I know that some people there can also testify to that. We've been faculty mentors for consultancy week for our full-time MBA students. And that consultancy week typically takes place in nice cities, and we might have the occasional night out and be late. But no matter how late we were, Hans will always be on time, early in the morning, 7 a.m., 8 a.m., in the lobby, setting the role model for the students, and always being sharp and ready to engage with the students, listen to them carefully, and really be generous with his time, because he didn't have to do that. It was not in the job description, but he wanted to set up a role model for the students and for us academic colleagues. So, an attentive listener, an intellectually curious mind, and a very genuinely generous person. This is what Professor Hans Frankort is. I think he's a true role model as an educator and as a scholar for us all. And I'm very proud to be able to call him my friend. And so please join me tonight in celebrating and congratulating Professor Hans Frankort.